March 25th, 2287 Terran Standard Calendar. I haven't written in a while. I've sent some recordings back home, but we're not getting any back. LT said it was 'cause there's EW, electronic warfare, going on. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we're so advanced we can jump onto another planet, but can't send a simple recording out here? It is what it is, I guess. Just gotta focus on the mission and take it a day at a time. We didn't find any Eskaidians in the town we went to. Well, none that were alive. Most of them were just piles of ash mixed into the snow. Figure that's what lots of plasma fire does to someone. We didn't come across any of the enemies in the town either. Just the bodies and dust should be bodies. It's hard to believe that thousands of people lived in this burnt crater of a city at one point. The few bodies that weren't ash didn't look very good. I'm not sure if it's 'cause the Eskaidians looked like that to begin with or something else. I tell myself that's how they usually look. I try not to dwell on it too much. Tommy died this morning. He was our saw gunner, and he was a good dude. He never had any issues making us laugh when we were in the shit. Wish I had more things to say about him. I only knew him for a couple weeks. One second I was talking to him on security about his girl back in London. Him showing me a frozen picture. The next he had a hole in his head. I had to roll him off the gun and return fire into one of the buildings down the road. We buried him in the shallow snow in some courtyard. They say we don't have the resources to bring the bodies back. I kept the picture that Tommy had in his hand when he died. Maybe I'll try to find his girl and give it to her. He never had the chance to tell me her name. We're leaving this place tomorrow, grouping up with some guys from 1st Armor. We're supposed to be light infantry, but I'd welcome a ride on a tank. I've always wanted to do that. Shit looked like so much fun in those historical pictures, and now I'm living it. It's one thing seeing those badass pics in books and imagining yourself doing it. It doesn't feel as badass actually going through it, just feels normal. Terran armor units were rare on Eskaido. The thick snow that permanently covered the planet made it near impossible for tracked vehicles to traverse the hilly terrain. Eskaido saw the first introduction of armored hovercraft. Terran Joint Forces Doctrine TP-113 updated after Eskaido conflict. March 29th, 2287 Terran Standard Calendar. Urban Ops was the most fun thing we did in training. It was different here. We lost almost half the platoon today. Well, we were already at half strength to begin with after the drop. It wasn't a day I feel like dwelling on right now. I just want to curl up in my snow hole and sleep. That's all I'm going to write for today. I wonder if there's snow back in Boston right now. It'd be nice to have one thing in common with my friends and family back home. The intense urban operations on Eskaido were a disaster for Terran forces. Inferior weapons and armor posed a challenge to Terran infantrymen tasked with breaching buildings. The point man in the breach was usually the lowest-ranking soldier on the team. Excerpt from CQC on an Alien World by Lance Corporal Andrew Flores. General Karne placed the book down on his desk before letting out a long sigh, deciding that the last entry for March was a good place to stop for a break. If he was hoping to get through the next 2 chapters this evening, he might need something a little stronger than this tea. He reached down and pressed a small button on the side of his desk, and one of his assistants made their way into the room. "How may I assist you, sir?" "Vanix. Clear my meeting with Araxium General Tanix tomorrow." "I think I'm going to make a day trip." "Of course, sir, right away." "And would you please bring me that new human beverage that everyone is fawning over?" "The ethanol one?" he asked, unable to remember the direct human word for it. "Yes, sir. Any flavor that you have in mind?" "Do they have a flavor from this human settlement called Boston?" "I'll track it down, sir. See you shortly." The general turned back in his chair, looking to his left, his eyes fixated on the display case that housed his own Galactic Honor Medal. He thought about his time spent earning the award. He had made difficult decisions, had to sacrifice people he cared about for the betterment of others. Many people he cared about, But it had all seemed so impersonal. Just orders and commands from a terminal or through a comms channel. He had never been required to go through the experience of being on the ground when it was all going down. Never had to witness it firsthand. Of the many books and articles that filled his digital library, they all described war from a statistical standpoint, measuring numbers against numbers, as if it were something that could be broken down into a cost-benefit analysis. He never had the need to read a first-hand account at his position. He regretted that it had taken him this long. March 30th, 2287 Terran Standard Calendar. I think writing about yesterday will make me feel better. I didn't get much sleep last night between the security shifts and the firebombings. Once we ran them out of town, they must have decided to get this place off the map. Johnson ended up under one of the bombs. The snow melted around him, and once we got to him, he was frozen solid. He ended up in the same shallow snow hole as Tommy. We're inside burning the Eskaidian bodies and clothes to stay warm. Cook says it's minus 89 right now. Can't even take my helmet off to eat, otherwise I'd freeze. We've been sustaining ourselves with injections. I miss the taste of food. Right, about yesterday. We got word saying there was an enemy platoon holed up on the other end of town. PL gave us the brief, and in it we're supposed to cross 5 miles through this ghost town. As bad as it's been, I'd say this was the coolest part of it all. My favorite hobby back home was exploring all the abandoned buildings around town. There isn't much to do in Maynard except drive around and see old stuff. 'Cause well, it's fucking Maynard. But this was like my own desolate city of ice to explore, ice and bodies. We pulled up on them around 1700 after a few hours of slow rucking. We were careful when we moved. So many windows and buildings, and each one could mean the death of us. PL let me call in the air support, said it would be good practice on the comms. Once we got the all clear from air, we moved in. First squad took the south side while second took the east. We only had enough of us for 2 squads now. On cue, Ramirez kicked in the door and I breached. They were right behind me. There were 3 of them sleeping on the floor inside, and another 4 playing some game in the middle. I put 2 in one of the ones around the table, as I made my way to the right corner. The first one I shot screamed and writhed on the floor while we all cleared the room. The rest of the team made quick work of the others. It felt good having my urban ops training pay off, seemed easy so far. Sergeant Miller put a few into the ones that were still making some weird noises, somehow still alive. They bled just like us. I'm not sure what I was expecting. I mean, it makes sense. Maybe it would have felt cooler if it was purple like a video game. Would have been easier for me if they were more alien, less like us. It still felt like I was killing another human being, but I don't think we had a problem seeing them as something else. That first one I shot finally bled out when we finished our lace reports. It was clutching some picture when it died, just like Tommy. We moved to the next building. There were a few in the street still screaming, screeching. Not sure how to describe the sound from the chemical bombs before. I shot one as I walked over it. Seeing its scaled skin melting off looked like a bad way to go. Maybe that's what he was asking for. I hope that's what he was asking for. Only PL had a translator. I was point man again. They said I would keep doing it until I couldn't anymore. I know we don't have the means to bring back the bodies. I wonder if I'd be considered a body if I was only wounded. Kicked in the next door and did it again. It wasn't as clean the second time. Before I even got through the doorway, one of them pulled me to the ground. He saved my life in a way, because the next 2 guys who entered the room got dropped. Last man Sergeant Graham had the saw and laid into the room. I was on the ground with one of these monsters on top of me, a serrated blade coming down at my face. We rolled on the ground while the machine gun fire grazed over top of us. I started to pull my own blade out with my one free arm. I should count myself lucky that its teeth were stuck behind its suit. Guess they needed to stay warm too. I finally got my knife out and stabbed it in the stomach. The cold air made its blood solidify around my blade after the first stab, and I couldn't pull it out. I rolled again, getting on top of him, and brought my helmet down onto its face. I did it again and again until Sergeant Graham pulled me off of him. I couldn't see anything anymore, the blood covering my goggles. Once I was calmed down, we scraped the icy red liquid off with a knife. I looked down at the body, and there was a crater where its face should have been. Still haven't seen who I'm fighting. We couldn't do anything to help Ramirez or McCrae on the ground. Ramirez was still alive when we moved to the next building, shivering and gasping for air. Sergeant said there's nothing we can do to help. It's too cold. I would have felt better if we at least tried. Graham put down more covering fire as the last few guys of our squad moved to the final building. PL and the rest of the platoon seemed to be in their own fight on the other side of it. We consolidated into one team. I kicked in the door and did it again. They were ready for us this time. They didn't have much cover in the room, and I shot one in the face as I entered. I was nearly knocked back from something hitting my front plates, but was pushed forward by the rest of the team. Just following my training, I went to my corner like I'd been taught, peering over at what might be the next threat. I focused my rifle on the door to the next room. About that time it opened up, and something was thrown through. I didn't have to guess what it was as I hit the ground. Thankfully, one of the bodies was there to block the blast. I stood up as 3 of them came through the door. I saw all 3 of them fall to my shots. Once we were sure the building was clear, we met up with what was left of the platoon. We lost 8 in total. Didn't have time to search the bodies or help anyone that was still alive. PL said we needed to move because there's enemy air coming in. We booked it out of there the way we came. I wonder if Ramirez was still alive when we left. We got back to the PB late that night. Supply crate had been dropped nearby. Being the last private that was still alive, I was one of the ones sent to grab it. You'd think that being able to traverse the stars and fight against aliens, we'd get the badass gear you see in all of those sci-fi stories. Guess a century without war really stagnates military advancement. What we have is way better than what it was 100 years ago, sure. But where's the energy shields and laser rifles? Maybe they have that stuff reserved for the high-speed special forces guys out here. We're staying in position for today, waiting on orders from higher, so I had the time to write this out. I didn't want to think about it, but it's best that someone records these kinds of things. Otherwise, nobody will ever know what we did out here. This way, nobody forgets the people we lost or the shit we did. On Eskaido, it was virtually impossible to render aid to fallen comrades. Once the environmental suit was breached and the cold air made its way in, the body shut down in minutes. The only historical conflict in Terran history that could even be comparable to Eskaido was the Korean War, which reached temperatures of -54 degrees Fahrenheit, -48 Celsius, but they didn't have the luxury of temperature regulation suits back then. Excerpt from Eskaido, A Modern-Day Korean War by Gunny Sergeant Billy M.C. Reiner III.